Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 28th of February 2016. Now this is part 4 for the Master's Mouthpiece coming soon, your planned future of gloom and doom. And it certainly is gloomy because it's rather nasty to find out the future's always planned. You know, it's always been planned, mind you. And it's always planned by the masters who control the big financial system that runs the world. They never let go, and their families take over and so on. It keeps going down through the ages. And they always make sure that they run the countries they dominated for themselves, for their own benefit, basically, at the top. And to make sure their progeny can take over and carry on into the future, living on the even higher standard of living for the elite themselves, while the rest of them are flattened out into what they call democracy, fair and all that. So we're all flattened out at the bottom on very meagre rations. That's what it's going to come down to. And I've been talking a lot from the 2014 Ministry of Defence think tank's projection of the future up to 2045. And it's quite explicit in there where they're going to take you all. And all the articles I'll read tonight too will tie in to this whole agenda because, and most folk won't want to accept it. You know, they're going to disbelief. You know, I don't want to believe that. It's uncomfortable to believe that. So I'll believe we have a chance of something. They can hardly verbalize what they want a chance of, but they'd rather want to live in hope that they can somehow live a decent life economically, even though you don't have it now, most of you, and free from all the worries and stresses that this system places upon you, because we're ruled by crisis, you see. Crisis creation, and it's either through economic means and crashes and all that kind of thing. It's all planned that way. Every bank crash is always planned, all the big ones. And it always, out the crisis, of course, they further unite the world under global authorities, you see. It's been an old trick, and they've been at this for an awful long time because they laid out their agenda really in the late 1800s, and you've been living through it ever since. Now, I started off years and years ago by telling folk that the future was planned. An uncomfortable message, to be sure, because you've all been trained to believe in the version of reality that's always presented to you. Part of it is indoctrinated into you. You learn a lot from your parents before you even go to school, because they were also indoctrinated into the master's version of reality. And you get the same indoctrination all through schooling and all through entertainment and so on. And you think this is reality. That keeps you in a lot of false hopes. And if you're in false hopes, you're always fighting the wrong things, you see. And they make sure there's lots of things out there for you to fight over, especially emotive topics that get emotions going, and your reason takes a back seat, you see. And when that happens, you're being used, and you're being fooled. And there are many, many techniques being in use today, especially today with mass communication and sock puppets all over the internet and so on, to make sure you can be crippled mentally in a sense, or even have a breakdown, because lots of folk actually do have breakdowns today. They can't handle what they think is a way out to fight something. And so that the big totalitarian system doesn't take them over completely. Others who have been perfectly conditioned, and they have been perfectly conditioned, you meet them all the time, are quite happy with everything that comes along, because they adapt into the next update on their reality, given again by their masters and neuroscientists and so on. And they think that they're being taken care of. Those are the ones who've been totally socialized, which means being taken care of by better people than yourself. You know, it's almost like daddy figures and mummy figures that are up there in business suits, and you might not even know their names half the time, but you think they're managing everything to take care of you, you see. And as long as you can vote, of course, you think you can always change it. Nothing's changed, as I say, for over 100 years. The use of the term democracy has everyone fooled in the general population, but not for those who actually run the democratic systems. The histories, as I've said before, of democracies all go back to the one group who still run it today, and their big plan for a whole global society run the way that they believed it should be run, with their natural masters running it, you see, which is themselves. And they put out in front of the public people for you to vote for, and the leaders of every party are pre-chosen by the CFR and the Trilateral Commission, you see, private clubs. It's hard for people who, again, are still stuck between their indoctrinated version of reality, their daily news with all these emotive topics. It's hard for them to grasp all the facts enough to get past the hurdle to understand that nothing happens by accident on a large scale. This doesn't happen, certainly not on a global scale. And if you've watched the world and studied it, as I've studied it my whole life actually, you'll be quite aware that we simply go along through a script that's written long before we're born, in fact, and your parents are born, and you're living through it too. It's been quite plain from the beginning where they want to take the whole planet, how they'll take the planet there, and all the tricks that they'll use as well on the way, which has been awfully successful. And people still rush out and vote, of course, because they're desperate. They want to try and regain some vestige of a better way of living, financially, more secure, etc. And yet, if you stop and just say, look at all the changes that have happened in your own lifetime, look at the word democracy, look at the revolutionary democracy of George Bush Jr., who, that was what the think tanks working with him, again the same bunch, used that con game, and it was a con game, to invades across the Middle East, or forcing democracy upon them. They had no intentions of doing any such thing. They demolished it all. Now, you think about it, when you hear the following articles about democracy worldwide, etc., about fairness and equality, always think of the massive cities, modern cities across the Middle East are demolished now. And now it's reverted back into pretty well primitivism. That was to bring democracy in. So when they say there's going to be a more democratic world, more fair and just, etc., you better keep that image in your mind when it's being promoted, because you've never had democracy, not true democracy. The big think tanks that are owned by the biggest corporations in the world and the big financiers they're classified as non-governmental charitable organizations. They fund thousands of non-governmental organizations, armies of them, who are the pressure armies. They put pressure and get all the attention of the media, because the media has always been in it too, to push their agenda forward. Now, no one elects these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations. You don't elect the think tanks either. Neither do you elect the big charitable foundations that pay and fund them all and organize them and train them. So what do you have? Do you have democracy, or a covert, more overt these days than never before, rule by corporations and their big non-governmental organizational armies that always put pressure to make you poorer across the world, to introduce the cons of carbon taxes, energy taxes, to bring you into what they've termed austerity, meaning poverty for you all, to make it the world more fair and just, you see, and to make sure that all your spending money is going to go to bare minimum essentials. That's what they mean by democracy for you. Now, many people still live in doublethink, as George Orwell called it, where they can hold in their minds two opposing opinions on the same topic and believe in them both. And they cannot crash through the false reality. into the real, true reality. Because it is depressing. It's a war that's been going on for an awful long time. A real war against your mind. All of you. All your minds are always under attack. And being kept off balance, as I say, by threats of wars and crises, etc. Financial chaos, you name it. Oh my God, get wiped out with some mutating bacterium or virus or something. Crisis, crisis, crisis. Now, if you look at leadership down through the ages, and if you know people too who are in positions of true leadership, they do not blow up and go berserk when they get bad news. Lower members on the totem pole, who are still the worker type, they may do so. But the guys at the top don't. They never lose their calm. Never. No matter what they hear, they don't lose their calm. And you must remember that too. Very important to understand what's really happening. Don't get caught up in emotive, nonsensical topics that go nowhere. Doesn't change a thing. Keep your calm. And you'll understand things far more easily as they really are. And why they're there, all these topics, all these different bits and bytes of information that tend to overload you. You're under war. You're under warfare. Now let's go into the Ministry of Defense projections, which are simply plans for the future. And you find out they're talking about interdependence. I mentioned that so many times over many, many years, this term, interdependence, where no nation, remember, is to be completely independent, meaning sovereign. That's what happened to all the nations that are now gone. They're called states now throughout Europe. They were previously nations. And now they're under a super parliament, a big massive block, you see. And we got the same thing for NAFTA. We got the free trade negotiations in NAFTA. And then they've merged them into the Trans-Pacific Partnership for a massive trading block as well. Well, you're going to page 84 of the Ministry of Defense plans here. And they talk about interdependence and international organizations. Awfully important. Awfully important. Globalization is likely to lead to increasing constraints on countries' freedom of action. So there you go. You can't be sovereign and be restrained on your freedom of action, you see. With countries likely to become more economically and politically interdependent. All the same terminology from the same people who brought you the European Union. As economic power shifts from west to east over the next 30 years, because that was always planned too, international relationships and institutions are likely to undergo a similar change in power distribution, as well as becoming increasingly reliant on other countries for critical supplies of food. Here's your basics here, right? Food, water, energy and materials. Smaller countries in particular may find that the way to be most effective on a global stage is to work within blocks. See, that started off. That's how you, a European bloc, you see. And a North American bloc. You had the Soviet bloc, you see. Such blocs may be structured around regional alliances or shared values to meet common interests in a more crowded environment. Current trends, we are likely to see more blocs with increased powers, although it's unlikely that many will have the same level of authority as a current economic union. Groups are also likely to be established to seek solutions for wider challenges, such as enabling trade or countering the effects of climate change. See, the big con there, of course, to keep you in austerity. and resource allocation. So, see, you have no sovereignty at all, because you see, you have the World Trade Organization deciding who can trade with whom and what you can trade with them and what you can and cannot sell to them and import from them and so on. So you can't be sovereign anymore. Future organizations may look similar to the G20, formed in 2008 as an emergency response to the global financial crisis. See, they always create the next part of their plan, and they always must get a crisis going to justify the introduction of something that was planned a long time ago, like the G20. This is the G20 has become to be recognized as the principal forum for leading states to agree global financial governance. So global financial governance does away with your own internal financial governance. Always planned that way. Who think's in charge of this big plan, you see? And it's all crooked too, as you well know. The money means nothing except power to those who actually, just start creating it all and lending nothing to countries. Lots of nothings, but they want lots of real things in exchange. Another example is Alliance of Small Island States, which is AOSIS, whose member states are geographically dispersed, formed around the shared interest of highlighting and seeking new solutions to rising sea levels. These new groups, like these countries, could challenge or seek to reform existing international organizations. See, did you vote for an international organization? No. To provide legitimacy for their actions and increase their representation. You see. And believe you me, they don't give a darn about small islands, or anybody else for that matter. Such organizations may strengthen the conditions for countries to fragment. If subnational regions, here you have regions which is also a bloc, you see, believes that their interests will be represented by international organizations. See, this is governed by international organizations as front groups, you see. They may have less reason to stay within their original country. This is not a new trend. Regions within countries that have split throughout history, and this trend is likely to continue out to 2045. As part of the supranational organizations, countries are more likely to be subject to international rules, no longer sovereign, standards, and institutions. That includes all your legal institutions. They'll be run by a central body for the globe, you see, further constraining their freedom of action. Increasing use of international tribunals such as the World Trade Organization, which was set up again for dispute settlement mechanisms and so on, supposedly, but it's much more authority than just that. Set up by the same organization, CFR, Royal Institute for International Affairs, same organizations, trilateral, they're special brands of the same group. Set up the Bank for International Settlements, which is the bank for all central banks, which is also set up, and it's private, and the International Monetary Organization, and everything else that's global, you see, it runs the world. Private organization set them all up. They even drafted up the whole agreement for the European Union and gave it to the governments to sign. Did the same thing for the NAFTA agreement here in Canada, in the States, Mexico, and other countries too, Latin America. Private organization. You didn't vote for any of them. Most of them don't even know what they are. And I've never heard of them. So you only hear about, in the mainstream, what they want you to hear about. The rest of the stuff is simply omitted, just never discussed. The topics I'm talking about are never discussed, as to their groups that are really running the world and planning it all. It goes on to talk about transnational private arbitration arrangements. It's transnational, you see, regional mechanisms such as European, African, and American courts of human rights. The EU, that's European arrest warrants, and the International Criminal Court could bring formal justice systems closer together. In Britain, always used that as binding. There were binding treaties signed all the time. until you're ruled by a foreign court that has nothing to do with you or even cares about you. I mean, and they literally change all your laws to conform with this new court's rules and so on, which changes everything. Once you change the legal system, it's no longer your country anymore. And the financial system too, naturally, but it never was yours anyway. And it says, it brings them closer together. Some of these organizations, though, have faced criticism which may hamper their future effectiveness. The International Criminal Court is sometimes accused of being overtly focused on Africa. By 2045, there are still likely to be clear regional differences in legal and judicial practice, and even between close allies such as the US and European countries. Now that really means, you see, you have to have supranational, again, significant organizations, global organizations that are running every part of what your sovereign country used to run itself. That's the whole trick of it. That's what the EU did, Parliament, that now rules over Europe and other countries too. And it says, driven by the growing self-confidence of member states and increasing economic strength of emerging countries and so on, India, Brazil, Nigeria, South Africa, there may be continued pressure to expand council memberships. So they give them, see, that'd be a little bit of a bait. Oh, we get a ruling membership at the United Nations and a real saying what's going on. You're helping cut your own feet off, you understand. That's how it's done. And it goes on quite a ways too about non-United Nations security states and lack of consensus and so on, and how it's going to all be changing and getting pushed into the real goals by 2045. Interesting, though. Dry, but again, remember what I said before. True leaders are not actors. If you watch someone who has a lot of responsibility, I mean a lot, natural responsibility, a true leader, a natural leader, natural, you see. They don't panic. They don't blow up. The lesser ones do. The ones that are not natural. They're greedy. But true leaders don't panic. And you're truly ruled at the top here by very cold, true leaders who know exactly what they're after. And they leave all the technical details to their lesser workers who tend to, they do blow up because they're greedy. They want to get up there themselves, but they'll never get up there if they let their emotions rule their reason. Now I'll go on to these articles here. And this one here was February 25th, 2016. It says, hold the Trans-Pacific Partnership. What is this ISDS? Lost amid what was essentially the Manny Pacquiao non-issue and the death of legal giant Antonin Scalia. The Trans-Pacific Partnership was signed almost without fanfare last February 4 in New Zealand, with Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and the United States and Vietnam. It's a humongous agreement representing 10% of the world's population, covering 40% of global GDP and 13% of international trade. And yet the TPP is confronted with profound obstacles. Current internal politics from both US, key Republican Democratic leaders of the latter, notably Hillary Clinton, are against it. No, they're not. And Japan, its TPP ratification momentum encountering a bump after resignation of Economic Minister Akira Amari, and the new Canadian government's seeming lukewarmness towards the deal make the odds of the TPP coming into effect this year minuscule. Well, we can count on that. One reason for the continued reluctance on the TPP has to do with the Investor-State Dispute Settlement System, or the ISDS. Though a set of provisions that are present in other trade deals, most notably the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, the TPP's ISDS has set off alarm bells due to its reach and possible consequences to a country's sovereignty. Well, no kidding. Eh? The US Trade Representative Office described the TPP's ISDs as that which deters foreign governments from imposing discriminatory or abusive requirements on American investors and protects the right to regulate the public in the public interest. Oh, never. That's never happened. Such sounds neutral, but note that it works both ways. Essentially, the issue is this: if a government decides, for example, to enact a measure designed for the public interest, such as the environment, health, morals, etc., a foreign investor disagreeing with that local law can sue that government under the provisions of the TPP before an international TPP arbitral tribunal, and have such law overturned and compensation paid, which is the fine the country, which is your tax money. They've used that all over Europe via the World Trade Organization, which again you didn't vote into existence. Columbia's University, Lisa Sachs, and Jeffrey Sachs, naturally, he's in everything. The real danger in TPP, February 2016. Put it this way: the investor-state dispute settlement gives multinational companies outlandish sway over regulatory policies, including environmental protection. Don't be fooled by what they claim here. The environmental protection and the carbon tax is all part of getting you into austerity, folks. And to bring this whole thing into, again, create a world crisis that doesn't exist. They've been spraying the skies for years and years now, daily, and controlling the weather. It says, with the ISDs, the arbiters have the authority to review their president's decision, give their own opinion on what the appropriate course of conduct should have been, and order the US government to compensate the investor if they believe a different decision should have been made, or if they disagree with the policy rationale for the decision. Note that what Johnson, Sachs, and Sachs say is applicable to all TPP members, because you're international now, you see. And they give you different examples for it and so on. Related to the foregoing is the fact that under the TPP, foreign companies can sue a government on the ground that the latter violated the minimum standard of treatment. This is the standard applied to the treatment of aliens to be afforded to covered investments. This includes situations relating to criminal, civil, or administrative adjudicatory proceedings and the level of police protection required under customary international law. So it goes on and on trying to explain it, but remember they've been using this in Europe too. Britain was fined at one time for trying to export oak that was too wavy. A nice flat board oak, but it was too wavy, you see. They want nice straight lines in it, not wavy ones. And they got fined for that. So the taxpayer coughed up that via the government. And various other things like that. It's just money for nothing for the big boys and the WTO. And no one's investigating the WTO. Most folk don't even know what exists. And then you have this one. Commission proposes new investment court system. This is back in 2015 in September for the TTIP and other EU trade and investment negotiations. The European Commission has approved its proposal for a new and transparent system for resolving disputes between investors and states. Now remember, the European Commission at the top is not elected. And a commission, this is how this whole deal has been brought in to govern your courts and everything else under international law. They set up commissions, like the WTO was set up as a commission too. That's how they created the European Parliament. But we need people to look after the different negotiations on trade and things like that. So that's how they started. Now they're a parliament. And the commissioners are at the top. And all their meetings are secretive. So what's the point of having the parliamentarians down below from all the countries of Europe? Well, they're prattling and so on when the commission at the top either okays something or tosses it out or puts through their own policies. And that's what we're going to do with all of the worlds in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Canada, the States, and all these other countries. It's how they bring in a super global parliament, folks. So they'll include the EU-US talks on transatlantic trade and investment partnership. Proposals for investment court system builds on substantial input received from the European Parliament, member states, national parliaments, and stakeholders through the public consultation held on ISDS. It's intended to ensure that all actors, as they call them, can have full trust in the system. Built around the same key elements as domestic and international courts, so it's all legal, it's all court systems and legalisms. It enshrines governments' rights to regulate and ensures transparency and accountability. Nonsense, rubbish. First Vice President Franz Timmermans said, with our proposals for a new investment court system, we're breaking new grounds. No kidding. A new investment court system will be composed of fully qualified judges. It's a whole new legal system that runs. Toss your sovereignty out the window, folks, because it's now global, you see. Proceedings will be transparent and cases will be decided on their basis of clear rules. In addition, the court will be subject to review by a new appeal tribunal. With this new system, we protect the government's right to regulate and ensure that investment disputes will be adjudicated in full accordance with the rule of law. So this is mainly to do with investment for investors. Remember, too, all these different courts will rule on everything that you do in your own country, all of you. And then you have this one: negotiators aim to sign the TTIP this year. They've already signed it, as you all know. Negotiators on the Transatlantic Train Investment Partnership claimed on Friday, 26 February 2016, that they were making progress towards reaching an accord by the end of the year as they completed the latest round of talks. You see. Under negotiations since July 2013, the TTIP would create the world's biggest free trade zone of 1 billion consumers, removing tariffs and harmonizing regulation between the European Union and the United States. Ready to seek to conclude negotiations with the US by the end of 2016, provided that the substance is right. That tells you a lot of substance, right? The US top negotiator, Ignacio Garcia Bercero, told a news briefing after the 12th round of negotiations in Brussels. Why are they doing it in Brussels, the super European Parliament? And why is their commission doing it too, folks? We must ensure we pick up the pace to get the agreement right, he said. I guess that means they're going to create more crisis to make it all happen. Negotiators for the first time discussed a divisive proposal to create an investment protection system, that's ISDS, that would allow companies to sue governments if they believe their interests have been harmed. The ISDs are very important, says, etc., etc. Opponents say the TTIP is undemocratic, naturally, and will lead to reckless deregulation at the expense of ordinary citizens once the deal is done. Well, you don't count ordinary. The pros don't count, as always said. On Thursday, anti-TTIP activists stole the show at Brussels, cocktail party organised by the Transatlantic Business Council. This is another NGO, Transatlantic Business Council. Two sides aim to conclude the treaty this year before the end of US President Barack Obama's administration. And so on it goes, you see. And then this one here, TransCanada suspends request. Says it's all tying in. The minister goes back to this Minister of Defence thing here. We covered it all in that. Long before any of this stuff came out here. TransCanada that shows you're on an agenda, you see. Suspends request for permit to build Keystone Pipeline November 2nd, 2015. And he goes through the national briefing, and but the pipeline said the permit was renewed January the 5th, 2016. And then, citing climate change, Obama rejects the construction of the Keystone Pipeline November the 6th, 2015 again. The $8 billion Keystone XL pipeline would have connected Canada oil sands to American refineries on the Gulf Coast. Offering the promise of improving prices, Canadian energy companies viewed the pipeline as a key to sustaining growth since the US buys the vast majority of petroleum produced by the oil sands. But many American environmentalists, NGOs that work for big corporations, use the project as a proxy for the oil sands, an energy source that they considered particularly polluting. The pipeline plan got caught in a regulatory and legal struggle as a State Department environmental review dragged on for years. So it says, so Obama rejected the plan in November, saying it would undercut the country's leadership on climate change. So they can start using all this nonsense, you see, to suit themselves. Still, he added, this pipeline would neither be a silver bullet for the economy, as was promised by some, nor the express lane to climate disaster proclaimed by others. TransCanada said it would take a write-down of $1.8 billion to $2 billion for its fourth quarter. The NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, you see, these centered treaties, challenges process does not allow Canadian or Mexican companies that believe they're being discriminated against by the U.S. government to overturn decisions, but the measure which grew out earlier trade provisions to compensate corporations after a foreign government expropriated their assets does allow them to seek a range of damages, including unrealized profits. The case filed by TransCanada at the Houston Division of the United States District Court for the Southern District of Texas does not seek compensation. Instead, the company is seeking to have Mr. Obama's decision reversed on the ground that he exceeded his constitutional powers. See, understand, every country's laws now are getting undermined by international treaties and agreements, binding treaties, as they call them, of this new global system. And it goes on and on about the companies and so on, etc., and experts and for everything, etc., that you don't vote for either. So, again, I'll probably drag on to say for about 6 years anyway, this haggling, etc., before they eventually either find one country or another, and you'll pay up through your tax money to big corporations. And the WTO, World Trade Organization here, just ruled against India's booming solar program. So here you are, we'll make this and it'll be good and we can export. No, the World Trade Organization, who don't vote into power and never did, had nothing to do with it, but have signed all these agreements, international bodies, now decides what you can make and what you can't make and what you can import or export and so on. You can't do it yourself anymore. On the heels of the recent global summit in Paris to tackle climate disruption, the World Trade Organization has ruled against an important piece of the climate solution puzzle. Well, the puzzle is just leave the climate alone. India's ambitious program to create homegrown solar energy, it says the ruling shows that decades-old, overreaching trade rules are out of sync with a global challenge to transition to 100% clean energy. So you see, we need another bunch of commissioners and legal experts, global ones, to run all of that too. That's what it's all about. In just 5 years, thanks to India's national solar mission, India's gone from having virtually no solar capacity to boasting one of the world's fastest growing solar industries. Just the last year, a parade of leading solar companies has announced plans to establish new factories in India to produce solar cells, the parts of solar panels that use sunlight to produce electricity. India has named the solar program as a core component of its contribution to the Paris Agreement to tackle climate change. Nonsense. It's all nonsense. But today the WTO released its ruling, it's a legal ruling, you see, against India's national solar mission, deciding that India's efforts to boost local production of solar cells have violated the WTO rules. So you're not sovereign anymore. Though India argued that the program helps the country to meet its climate commitments under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, you see, they've got you in a stranglehold. The WTO rejected that argument. Indeed, the ruling body states that domestic policies seen as violating the WTO rules cannot be justified. So you cannot make national policies anymore. They've got to make it all for you. And so on. And of course, too, is to suit bigger companies that are probably based in China and owned by the guys that own the US, Canada, and every other country pretty well on the planet. I will hop back to the Ministry of Defense think tank's projection of what's to come, you see. And this is called large-scale automation of work, this part. And that's page 71. And it reminds me of the BS, you see, that was put out in the 60s and 70s by the big think tanks as they conned you into a beautiful future of utopia. And I remember helping a guy move a lot of stuff out of his grandma's home when she died. And her husband, who was dead, had stacks of magazines and newspapers going back, way back through the 60s and 70s. And I remember looking through them because I've always been interested in understanding how it got to where we were already, you see. And that's how you understand the cons were used back then. And you can see the same cons down through your life getting used again and again. But back in the 60s, and again it was through the Royal Institute for International Affairs, you see, this big think tank that they owned as well, had published this article on the Utopia. And every paper carried them that you had there. You had about 3 or 4 editions of different papers and so on. And you had people, drawings of folk in Roman togas, believe it or not, because they'd controlled the weather by then, in the millennium, which is past already. And you'd have no work to do. Most folk would be living, just the biggest thing they'd be seeking is pleasure, because nothing to do. It never mentioned how you get money or anything, or how, etc., or how you'd live and support yourself. No, you'd all be unemployed, basically, and the few that would have to work would consider a privilege to work, you see, running the big system of Utopia. It was all hairy-fairy, and we'd all be playing flutes and dressed in these togas round springs and that, and all that kind of nonsense, this bright future. And Britain went through, it never come out of hell since before World War II. And it's continued right through to the present time. Now it's pretty well gone as a country. And then you see the same thing getting repeated here, you see, this think tank. Because when things work, like Plato said, if you understand this sequence to implement a plan, an agenda, this worked in previous civilizations or generations. If you know the formula and study it, how it introduced bit by bit, the public will adapt and go along with it. So the same formula will work again and again and again. Why change it when it works, right? Anyway, large-scale automation of work from the Ministry of Defense. Robots and automated systems have the potential to be near ubiquitous by 2045, capable of carrying out extremely complex tasks with no human involvement. Potentially, machines could carry out manufacturing and agricultural tasks, repair themselves, as well as clean, cook, and tidy. Advances in artificial intelligences could make machines so lifelike that they are able to answer phones in call centers, take care of children, and even teach. Computers could potentially diagnose and treat almost every medical condition. Isn't that wonderful? If progress on this scale is made in the future, it's possible there would be very few jobs still carried out by human beings who could in practice be almost totally excluded from the workplace. Remember, this was written a couple of years ago. And you're only hearing about it now in the paper, this big blitz to get you used to the idea. They're going to get ruled in by robots. Your cops will be robots, obviously. Robocop. In richer countries, this large-scale automation of work would be likely to have a most positive effect. So don't worry if you're still classed as a wealthy country as you go down the tube, if you slide down that big chute, It's going to be positive for you, as governments would probably be able to provide their citizens with all the material comforts they need. Well, there you go. They'll just print out the money and give you rations or something, and you go out and play tennis all day. However, many people may initially struggle to achieve a sense of purpose and social status without work, with possible rises in cases of depression. Oh, dear. Educational systems may need to be totally redesigned to enable people to self-motivate and gain satisfaction from activities other than work. Well, they've been teaching them that for well over 20, 30 years now. You don't come out of school with any knowledge that's any good to you. And it says, over time, when populations have become more used to a life without work, they may fill their time playing sport. We're back to the togas again. Painting, reading, and composing music, you see. Well, why compose it when robots can do it themselves these days, In poorer countries, however, large-scale automation of work could still could stall economic development in poorer countries, you see. Perhaps even reversing it. For example, foreign companies would be far less likely to employ cheap labour, as machines would be so much more cost-effective and efficient. Some employment could initially remain, as poorer countries would be less likely to afford the use of machines to carry on their internal labour markets. Eventually, though, automated equipment would probably become cheap enough for even these countries to afford. Poorer governments may not be able to provide more than an extremely basic level of subsistence, meaning that people would have no way to improve their living conditions. This could lead them to become deeply frustrated and angry. Oh dear. Nevertheless, citizens would still receive some benefits from large-scale automation, such as charity-funded machines, capable of providing very cheap diagnosis and treating disease. You see the Konya, you know. And obviously, too, in this article I was telling you, that you're still going to have poor countries because all do with money. They can't afford things. So how's the money going to be generated, folks, when you're all unemployed and playing tennis? Or, you know, prancing around in a field in your Roman togas and playing your flutes and that, you know. This is mass protests and civil unrest could still develop with anti-robo movements, where you've seen all the sci-fis of conditioned to all this, and you'll think it's all normal when it comes. And these movements could become increasingly powerful, you see. And it goes on and on about how to work it in with flexible working initially, etc., blah, blah, blah. Yep, you know that corporations have always been in the business of bringing you utopia where you don't have to work, right? That was the whole history of the Industrial Revolution, as it worked folk into their graves. On hardly, there weren't even subsistence wages. Behind it all was for the greater good of the future. We'd all be sitting again playing tennis and stuff like that, and composing music, you know. Yeah. And then we go on to this one here. The future is supposed to be a glorious place where robot butlers cater to our every need, and the 4-hour workday is a reality. But the true picture could be much bleaker. Top computer scientists in the US warned over the weekend that the rise of artificial intelligence and robots in the workplace could cause mass unemployment. Mike, these guys are geniuses, eh? And dislocated economies, rather than simply unlocking productivity gains and freeing up all to watch TV and play sports. Well, how are you going to watch TV and play sports when you have no income coming in, eh? And a recent report from Citi, produced in conjunction with the University of Oxford, highlights how increased automation could lead to greater inequality. No kidding. Geniuses. Thank God they're around to guide us all, eh? If machines are capable of doing almost any work humans can do, what will humans do? The rise of robots and AI in the workplace seem almost inevitable at the moment. This article is 2016, February, and the Ministry of Defence one I read just before that was 2014. Hey, we're living along a script, folks, eh? Yeah, well, here we go again, and it says here, the Financial Times reports that Moshe Vardi, a computer science professor at Rice University, Texas, told the American Association for the Advancement of Science over the weekend, "We're approaching the time when machines will be able to outperform humans at almost any task." Well, how about the politicians? You know, it might be cheaper if you get second-hand used ones. Society needs to confront the question before it's upon us. If machines are capable of doing almost any work humans can do, what will humans do? Well, we'll be free to pursue leisure activities, but I do not find the prospect of leisure-only life appealing. I believe that work is essential to human well-being. No, self-sufficiency is, folks, and that was taken off you long ago. It's still going on, actually. So the findings and fears are echoed in a recent research note put out by Citibank and so on. And Citibank's Global Equity Product Head, Robert Garlick, writes in the report, could automation increase leisure time further while also maintaining a good standard of living for everyone? The risk is that this increased leisure time may only become a reality for the underemployed or unemployed. That means you won't get your personal butler and stuff, you know. The report released last month entitled Technology at Work, V20, concluded that 35% of jobs in the UK are at risk of being replaced by automation. 47% of US jobs are at risk, and across the OECD, the European Union as a whole, an average of 57% of jobs are at risk. In China, the rise of automation is as high as 77%. Do you really think they want you around, folks? Now, our previous Minister of Defence, one I read back in 2008, we're up to 2050, and said there'd be a drastic population decline around that time. What would cause that? Maybe get bored out your skull. We'd all die of boredom, eh? No. They don't want you around, folks. They don't need you anymore. The elite don't need you anymore. They are eugenicists. They have their wives picked for them to breed the right quality people. You understand? The inbreed. Been doing it for centuries. Anyway, Garlick writes, the big data revolution and improvements in machine learning algorithms means that more occupations can be replaced by technology, including tasks once thought quintessentially human, such as navigating a car or deciphering handwriting. And it goes on and on and on. Talking about retraining people. Wait, retraining you for what? Huh? How long have you been hearing that nonsense? The European Centre for Development of Vocational Training estimate that in the EU, nearly half of the new job opportunities will require highly skilled workers. Today, technology sectors have not provided the same opportunities, particularly for less educated workers, as the industries that preceded them. And another one from Oxford, from the Oxford Martin Programme on Technology and Employment, says the expanding scope of automation is likely to further exacerbate income disparities between US cities. No kidding. Cities that exhibited both higher average levels of income in 2000 as well as the average income growth between 2000 and 2010 are less exposed to recent trends in automation, etc., etc. The future's all planned for you. Now, on page 86, it ends basically talking about growing populations and the problems we'll have leading up to this great target date, 2045. And they talk about, by 2045, you won't identify yourself with a country anymore, a country of origin. You see, what does that mean, eh? Can you think it? What does that mean? And then they go about uprisings, etc., because from poor countries and all the rest of it, because they can't afford the services. I guess they're too busy buying robots for butlers, eh? And then you go into the next page, identity and the role of the state, page 87. And talk about folk who are discontent with their governments and they'll challenge it collaboratively, as seen in the Arab Spring, which is all fomented and paid and funded and set up by the West. This could lead to increased civil unrest and extreme cases of disintegration of order in affected countries. A key service that states is likely to be able to provide in the future is security, particularly information security. What nonsense is that? As people live more of their lives online, and you shouldn't be living in your life online to start with, folks. That's not living. That's been guided by your masters. Safeguarding personal data is likely to be increasingly important. Private companies already provide much of our communications infrastructure, from post and so on, providing phone and email services and blah, blah, blah. In response to customer demands, they will take greater responsibility for making sure those services are secure. What rubbish. Since we're spied on by those who are bringing in this system to make sure you're under control. And then it goes into longevity of data storage. You see, that's awfully important because everything you've done your whole life long now for a lot of folk, is already, for the young folk, it's already online and NSA and a whole bunch of other agencies. So privacy, the longevity of data storage means that there's an ever-growing record of people's activity, and attempts to avoid leaving a digital footprint may become increasingly difficult. At the same time, growth in number of surveillance devices is increasing at a rapid rate, and unless individuals go to great lengths to avoid detection, It's likely by 2045, a near complete record of their movements can be built up in and interpreted by an interested party. It's not just your movements, it's what you're looking at and what you're interested in, and your whole personality profile always getting updated by the help of, well, yourself on Facebook, etc. For example, criminality may prove increasingly difficult to conceal, allowing governments, businesses and individuals to be held to account. But governments may also increasingly exploit extensive databases and surveillance devices to monitor and curtail individuals' activities. Well, they already do. They're censoring people and so on. And then they go even through into religion and ideology. Religion is likely to remain a significant component of people's identity, with evangelical Christianity growing in popularity in Latin America, Asia and Africa. That's the feel-good type, Just wave your hands in the air and feel good, that's what the government wants you to do, you see. It's not real Christianity. And it says here, as well as Islam becoming more prevalent in the Middle East and North Africa, some religions are likely to become increasingly politically assertive. Almost certainly continue to be assisted by globalization and by development in communications technology, permitting the messages of religious groups to unite diaspora populations and appeal to a far wider audience than previously possible, etc., etc., etc. Well, your whole future is mapped out for you. And they'll have to address new challenges from religious groups. Well, they'll manage their minds. Well, they always have too, like they've managed every other. In fact, they love groups. They create lots of groups for you to join, you see. That's why they give you such a variety on the internet, and folk fall right into it and give all their data away, what they're thinking about and all the rest of it, what the complaints are, in fact, are they affected, disaffected, whatever it happens to be. Now, folks, remember that you can buy the books and discs of my talks at cuttingthroughmatrix.com, and people I've lost total count. It's impossible to keep track of it, of all the folk that use the archive section, which is free across the whole planet, and lots of talk show hosts use it all the time, but never mention you, of course, you see. So I end up being an unpaid researcher for what ends up in their books and in their shows. But so you can help support me by buying them, the books and discs, or donating to me. Once in a blue moon, just donate to me and help me tick over. And I'll be back with another part of this same series. I know it's dry and it's boring, but it's real. It's all planned. Here's the plan, folks. So from Hamish myself, from a very snowy Ontario, Canada, it's good night to me. Your God or your gods go with you.